We're learning the fourth Sikha of Chaya Sara in Chelek Tezvav on page 174. Shir today is being learned to the Nishmas, Rabbi ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. This is a Sikha on the Rashi, this week's Parsha, a very Gishmak Sikha. And also later, the Rebbe will explain a very interesting, seemingly strange Gemara in connection to this Pasuk. In Pasuk, Vayesef Avram Vayikach Isha Shma Keturah. The Pasuk says Avram Avinu took another wife and her name is Keturah. Is Rashi Mefadish, Rashi explains, Keturah zu Hagar. Who is Keturah? She's Hagar. V'nikras Keturah al Shem Shana Maseh Ketores. The name Keturah is because her deeds were beautiful like the Ketores, like the incense. V'shekashra Pischa. And also because she tied closed her opening. Shalin izdavga la'adam miyom sheparsha me'Avram. She did not have relations with any other person from the time that she left Avram. Darfen verstehen. So on this Rashi we have the following questions. Aleph, the first question is, was is the hechrich from Pshute shel mikras Keturah zu Hagar? Where do we see in the simple pshat of the pasuk that Keturah is Hagar? V'adarab, on the contrary, from Pashtus lashon hakasav, from the simple words of the pasuk, Vayosef Avram vayikach isha shma gaimed, that Avram Avinu added and married another wife, is mashma as vayikach isha meita anaye lekichas isha, that here Avram went and married another wife, b'noisef to the friedige, in addition to the previous wives that he was married to. V'yafrektake in Medrash v'hoksiv v'yosef. The Medrash asks this question on this pshat that Keturah is Hagar, but how could you say that if it says v'yosef, which simply means he married another wife that he wasn't married to before? Beis, the other question there is, von dem was Rashi sagt, dem zweiten Tam mit Avav achibor. When Rashi says the second reason for her name, Keturah, he says it with a vav, connecting the two reasons. V'nikras Keturah al shem shana maseh ketores. That she's also called Keturah because her deeds are beautiful like ketores. V'shekashra pischa, and because she tied her opening. Unit davarache v'chayetze b'zeh. Rashi does not say, as he usually does when he brings a second interpretation, davaracher. Says, move on, it's understood as Rashi learned, that Rashi is telling you here, as das is nitzvei bazundere pirushim. These are not two different interpretations of the name, vi in Medrash, as it's quoted in the Medrash, as two different interpretations. Favas nekras Keturah, why her name is Keturah, nor tzvei taimim in ein pirish. It's two reasons for one pirish of the name Keturah. Das heißt, as the Namen Keturah is merames of die beide Abteilchen zusammen. The name Keturah hints to both of these details together. Lashon Ketores, Shana Maseh Ketores, it means the Ketores, that her deeds are beautiful like Ketores. On Lashon Kshira, V'shekashra Pischa. Also, that it means to tie, that she tied her opening. Darfum verstehen, so the question there is, from Vanet Nemt Rashi, what's Rashi's source, the Pshute shel mikra, in the simple reading and understanding of the Pasuk, as Matei gerufen Keturah tzlib zwei taimim, that her name Keturah is because of two different reasons. Nit wie Medrash, as does an zwei pirushim. And unlike the Medrash, which brings these two meanings of her name as two different interpretations. Gimel, the third question on this Rashi is, the kushya samafarshim, the question the Mefarshim will ask here. Oifim pasik, vatelach vatesa. Earlier in last week's Parsha, Vayera, it says that she went and she got lost on her way. What does this mean? Dr. Rashi, chazra ligilule beisavia. This means that she returned to the Avodah Zarah of her father. Haint, if so, vi sagt Rashi, doshana maseh ketores, that her deeds are beautiful like the ketores, if she returned to her father's Avodah Zarah. The beer in them, so the explanation in this Rashi here is as follows. So first to understand, where does Rashi take from in the Pasuk, in the Psukim, that Keturah is Hagar? Das was is machriach Rashi zu sagen. Keturah zu Hagar. What brings Rashi to say that Keturah is Hagar is akashya nitten dem proti is digam pasuk, a question that we have not on this individual pasuk here, not in dem klal is digam sipur from Avram v'Hagar, but actually in the general story regarding Avram and Hagar. Rashi hat frier mefarish gewen. Rashi already told us earlier, as Avram megayeres ha'anoshim v'Sara megayeres ha'noshim, that Avram converted and brought the men to serve Hashem, and Sara influenced the women. If so, if we see Avram Avinu had an influence on people, all the men on the outside, He definitely had a tremendous influence on the people in his own home. Oich Yishmael. Actually, regarding Yishmael himself, we see Avram had a positive influence on him. He went out with bad behavior. However, we know that he did tshuva still in the lifetime of Avram Avinu, and of course with the influence of Avram. If so, the question here is, how is this possible that Hagar returns to her father's house to Avodah Zarah when Avram hat nicht gewirkt, as he soll tshuva tun, and Avram could not influence her to do tshuva? Now, you cannot say what you would think simply the answer for this is, das ist der Fall, was Hagar hat sich gefunden, berichik machen von Avram, is because Hagar was away. She returned to her father's house, so Avram had no contact with her. Wie man früher gelernt, as Avram hat mit Yishmael and weggeschickt mit Beisai. And like it was we learned before in last week's parasha, that Avram Avinu sent Hagar away together with Yishmael. While by the Maisa Akedah, because at this time over here in Parshas Chaya Sara, which comes after the story of the Akedah, is Shem Bata geworden the matzah from Goresh Alma Zeis Vespena. This situation of the Alma, which is Hagar, and her son, which is Yishmael, that they were expelled, that was already bottled. They returned back home. Virashi taiched them pasuk as Shnei Na'arav. Rashi himself says that when Avram Avinu goes with his two Na'arav, his two young lads, to the Akedah, who was one of them? Yishmael v'Eliezer. Yishmael was there with Avram. Und in Pashtus hat sich Hagar gefunden zusammen mit Yishmael. And it's simple that Hagar was together with Yishmael with her son by Avram Avinu. If so, the question remains: how is it possible that Hagar returned legilule beis avia? What's with Avram's influence on his own wife, on his own family? Of them, Zogt Rashi, so therefore Rashi here tells you, Ketura zu Hagar, that when the Torah here refers to the wife Avram Avinu married as Ketura, this is Hagar. V'nikras Ketura Achulu, and her name Ketura is that she has beautiful deeds, which means as Enachanami. The Torah here is telling you that this is actually what happened. Durach anrufen Hagar mit Namen Ketura, the fact that the Torah switches her name. It doesn't refer to her with her real name of Hagar, but it switches her name to Ketura, meint the pasuk zum Meramezayin. The pasuk here is hinting to you as it's that now she did tshuva and her deeds are beautiful like Torahs. Because in fact she did tshuva on this, that she returned to her father's Avodah Zarah. So Adarabah, this is exactly why the pasuk is using this unusual name of Ketura to answer the question that you have: what's going on with Hagar? How is it possible that Avram Avinu is not influencing her? Damit is meduyik v'gam yumtak lashon Rashi Ketura zu Hagar. With this, it's very precise, the words of Rashi, and it's sweetly understood. Why Rashi says Ketura, this is Hagar. Nit, he Hagar, not the more usual expression in Lashon Kodesh, which is Ketura, she is Hagar. Al derech Lashon HaKosov, as we find in one of the psukim in this week's parsha, he, Chevrain, she, or this is Chevrain, but it uses the term he as opposed to zu, as you find similar in other places. So what's the difference between these two expressions, he and zu? He, Hagar, she is Hagar, which is a Lashon Nister. This is an expression that you use in Lashon Kodesh when you're speaking about someone that's not here, that's not present. Someone that's Nister, someone that's not here. So what that would mean over here in this context, as da by the psukim, ret keinen et wegen Hagar. Learning the psukim in the parsha here, nobody's thinking about Hagar. She's not a subject b'chlal. Sie is wie eine was is Nister. She's somebody that's out of the picture. She's gone. So then, if Rashi were to say that Ketura, he Hagar, although we're not thinking about or speaking about Hagar, but nevertheless, Ketura, she is Hagar. Then, however, what does Rashi say? Ketura, that is, this is Hagar. What does this mean? Meintes, as Hagar is lenoichach. The term zu is when you speak to somebody directly, which is present right over here. Why is Hagar present? Where in the psukim here are we speaking about Hagar? The answer is, there's a question that the learner has when he's learning here, and he's thinking about Hagar. Der Ben Chamish halten ein Teine. The Ben Chamish is arguing and asking, was tut sich mit Hagar? What's going on with Hagar? For was gefindt man it as is al tshuvaton? Why do we not find regarding Hagar that she did tshuva? So this is a question that the learner is actually having when he's learning the psukim here. He's looking in the psukim, where do I see that Hagar did tshuva? And the Ribber is Rashi Medayek Zu Hagar. And therefore Rashi says, yes, in fact, you're thinking about this Hagar. She's present. She's on your mind. This is actually Hagar. Right here, the Pasuk is telling you, this is the Hagar you're thinking about. Which you are asking and inquiring about what's going on with Hagar. Zu Hagar. This is Hagar. Unbelievable how one word here, Zu, the way the Rebbe teaches, Zu is when you're learning the psukim properly and you have a question, so that's on your mind. So that's the Zu right over here. This is the pasuk is addressing an obvious question that comes up. Rashi ken sich aber nit bagnugenim mit dem tam allein. However, Rashi is not satisfied just with this interpretation that ketura means that her deeds are beautiful like Titus. It's true as it's this non maseh Titus that now her deeds are beautiful like Titus. She did tshuva. But if there was a time period that she returned to the Avodah Zarah at her father's house, so Avram Avinu was es given at nur betachlis in der Nacht mit genommen leisha. So Avram Avinu, which was 100% modest, he would not go and marry her. If, while she went back to her father's house, to Avodah Zarah, and she had a relation with someone else. Ubefrat, as der Pasuk Vayesev Avram goyme, kommt bald noch ein Pasuk Vayivia Yitzchak ha'oyele Sara imay goyme. Right before this, the Pasuk speaks about Yitzchak that married his wife Rivka, was Sai Sara and Sai Rivka, seine gewend snuois betachlis. So Sara was modest to the greatest degree, and Rivka as well, similar to Sara. So after the Pasuk tells us the story, how Yitzchak marries Rivka, a wife which is a tznuah betachlis, so after this it would come and tell us that Avram Avinu married Keturah, which is someone that was not a tznuah, at least in her past, that she had a relation with someone else. The Ribber is Rashi Mamshech, so therefore Rashi continues based on the context of the Psukim here and explains immediately, Visha Kashra Pischa Chulu. And she tied her opening. As in dem Namen Keturah is Eichmenum is, das was loin is Davgala Adam Yom Sheparshim Avram. The name indicates that she did not have any relation with anybody from the time that she left Avram. Und der Ribber is Iroi as Avram soll sie nehmen. So therefore she's fit that Avram Avinu should remarry her. So this explains how we know that this is Hagar and why Rashi brings the two pshatim and the meaning of the word Keturah. But now here the Rebbe will go further to explaining the details of this Rashi al pipnimiyas anyanim. Al pianal, based on what we learned until here, as mit namin Keturah is the pasuk mirames as Hagar hadurach Avram zashpat shuva getan. That the word Keturah, the name, indicates and it hints to the idea that Hagar did shuva. So we now can explain on a deeper level etliche pratim in pasuk. Some details here in the pasuk that are not smoothly understood, at least if you look at it with a deeper lens. Aleph, the first question here is Vibal das Keturah zu Hagar. If in fact Keturah is his previous wife that he was married to, Hagar. Vi pasta loshen Vayosef Avram goyme. So how does the pasuk say Vayosef, which seems to say that he added and married a new wife? Via frekt medrash kanal sifalef. As the medrash asks, quoted earlier. Now al derech hapshat is this nitkin kashya. Learning the simple understanding of the pasuk, this is not a question. Vachach as Keturah zu Hagar, even if it's true that Keturah is Hagar, vibalt aber as is by Avram given a naya lekicha, but because he's now freshly remarrying her, pastav dem the lashon Vayosef goyme. So you could use the expression of Vayosef that he's adding, that this is a new lekicha. Und nachme, furthermore, vibalt frier is Hagar given a shifcha. Earlier, when he was married to her in a status of her being a maidservant. Und itzter hat Avram genommen als isha. Now Avram marries her as a wife. Al kopanim via pilegesh. At least on the level of a pilegesh, a concubine. Now what does a pilegesh mean? In the meifen von nashim b'ksuba, the only difference between a isha and a pilegesh is that a regular wife also has a ksuba, the marriage contract, and all the details that are written into the ksuba. And pilegesh, mernit was below ksuba. A pilegesh is really a full wife, it's just that without this ksuba, without the marriage contract. But her status is being completely elevated from being just a maidservant to becoming a wife. So therefore this is something new, that Avram Avinu, yes, he was married to her before, but as a maidservant, not in the status of a wife. And now he marries her as something new, a wife. So it's not a question in the simple pshat of the pasuk. Wird aber der Loschen bei Yosef gehen sein noch mehr meduyek, glattig, leken bier bei pnimis anyanim kedel kaman. However, the Rabbi will explain the expression of a Yosef, that it means literally, absolutely new, according to pnimis anyanim, as will be explained. Beis, another question here is, Favazan in the noim myself and Hagerin, merumiz, durch vergleichen mit Ketores dafke. Why is the fact that her deeds are beautiful specifically compared to Ketores and not anything else that's beautiful? Gimel, the third question here is, Favas is the Torah meramis, dem inyan. Why does the Torah hint this idea here, was Hagar hat Tshuva getan, that Hagar did Tshuva dafke in dem Pasuk, was retzich wegen dem as Avram hat genommen, where it speaks about the fact that Avram went and married her. Especially according to what the Rebbe said before, this is really a question that comes up when the learner is learning the Psukim here, like what's going on with Hagar? Why is Avram not influencing her? So the Torah has to tell us that yes, in fact, she did do Tshuva. So why is the Torah saying this specifically here when Avram Avinu remarries her? So to explain this, in Chassidus is mavur the chiluk zwischen der Avede von Avram vor sein Mal sein und der Avede was nach dem. In Chassidus it explains the difference between Avram Avinu's level in his serving Hashem before his bris and after his bris. Kaidem shenimal hat geheißen Avram. Before the bris, Avram's name was Avram, which means was meant Avram. And what does Ram mean? Ram means exalted. Is der Heuben und abgetragen vom Welt. He is elevated and removed of this world. Ram al kol goyim, like the expression in the pasuk, exalted and higher from all nations. Sein Avede is in madreges from kedusha gufe. His Avede was primarily all within levels of kedusha itself, not so much related to people on the outside. However, after the bris, is ein Namen geworden Avraham. Here, his Aveda changed. Now his name is Avraham, which is Av Hamoin Goyim. He's the father of the masses of all nations. As erat oivgetan oichin Goyim. Here, Avram Avinu came and was working and dealing with and accomplished even amongst Goyim. Erat a meile gewen zu kedusha. He elevated them to holiness. So the nature of Avram Avinu's Aveda changed. Und die Aveda is given durch Sara. And we find that this Aveda he accomplished through Sara. Was hat von die Goyim mafred given de Pseiles und meile given sehr teiv v'nitzaitzis kedesha. We find regarding Sara that she dealt with situations of Goyim or with Goyim, with the people outside from the nations of the world. And how do you elevate the good that's in them? By separating the negative, and then you have the ability to elevate the holy spark, the positive, the good that's in it. Where do we find this by Sara? Und der Vater hat sie gesagt, Goresh ha'oma zeis vesbena. Sara was the one that said to expel Hagar and her son from the home in order to get rid of the negative and to be able to elevate the positive. So this is the concept and the method or the process of bitter nitzaitzis to elevate the sparks that there are in the world. Now, the level that Avram came to, an even greater level, after Sara passes away, is bashtanen in them, was Yosef Avram, vayikach isha shma ketura. It's hinted and it consists over here in this fact that Avram Avinu goes and marries Ketura. As at machse b'tshuva given Yishmael and Hagar, that he brought Yishmael and Hagar to do tshuva. The Hainu, what this means is, at aufgetan dem Birur, euch in die Pseiles, for Sara hat mafred given Garish. That over here, Avram Avinu came to a new level that he was able to even refine and elevate Hagar and Yishmael, which was unable to be done before. In the lifetime of Sara, the process of the Birur consists of removing the negative and then being able to elevate the positive. But the negative itself has to be removed. Over here, Avram Avinu was able to go and remarry Ketura, Hagar, and to elevate the Pseilis as well. Das war in them, the explanation of what Avram Avinu did here, that Birur in Goyim, when you elevate from the nations of the world the holy sparks, was Hatzachayv Getan Durich Sara. So when this was accomplished through Sara herself, is not in Klippus Noiga. This is only in the area of Klippus Noiga, was is more von Teiv Ra. Klippus Noiga is a klippe, but it's a mixture of good and bad. Was der Reif von Birur is, so what's the process of the refinement? Durch mafred sein de Pseiles Vera, by separating and rejecting what's waste and what's bad. Meile sein dem Teiv, was is given more of dorten, and by elevating the good and the positive that's mixed into this negative place. That's the process of the elevation through Sara. So you have to find the point of goodness, the point and spark of holiness that's there in this negative place. So since the waste, the negative itself, does not have good, or does not have at least revealed good in it, the spark of godliness that's there is so concealed that it's not sensed at all. So the only way to deal with it is by rejecting it, by expelling. That was the level of bitter, of Sara. This is the normal, ordinary, natural way, the process of how you elevate a holy spark from a negative place. Aber der Bitter von Yishmael und Hagar is nicht durch Meile sein, dem Toiv HaMe'urev was sei. In order to be able to elevate Yishmael and Hagar themselves, it's not going to be enough to just try to identify and find the point of good that's mixed in them. Weil bei sei is nicht doch kein Toiv Gali. Because if you're going to try to find that point of goodness, you won't discover it. It's not going to come out because it's so concealed that it's impossible to identify. Nor says a bitter b'derech ha'isafeh. Here, the process, the refinement has to be something much deeper. You have to be mechadish something. You have to find goodness within the evil itself. Al derech zdainis nasale kezachias, which means just like you can take zdainis, avedas that were done b'mezid, intentionally, and through a very deep tshuva, you're able to transform the zdainis themselves into zachias. So here you can elevate something which is evil in itself, which means the spark of godliness is so concealed there and it's not sensed at all. Even that can also be, that psilus itself could also be transformed and elevated. That's completely different. And that's the chiddush of Avraham Avinu that elevated and brought to tshuva Yishmael and Hagar. Das is the bir in the drei diyukim de leil sif dalet. So now this explains and answers the three questions asked before regarding the name Keturah, why it says Vayosef, and why specifically Ketores, and why in connection to the marriage of Avram. So Aleph, the first point, the Lashon Vayosef Avram Goyme. When it says there Vayosef, that Avram added, why does it emphasize this idea of added? Weil der inyan from mahapich zayin letoiv psoiles gimel klippes atmeis is an inyan from Isafa, because this, to take psoiles, to take the waste itself and to elevate it, not only by trying to find a more ruchnisdige aspect of the psoiles, which is susceptible to being elevated, which you see the godliness in it more on its surface, but even to go into the actual psoiles itself. And there, to elevate it into Kedusha is an inyan from Isafa. You're adding something, it's a complete chiddush, this is something novel, it's totally new. The Tzemach Tzedek Taich the Pasuk, this is connected to a pshat that Tzemach Tzedek says regarding the name of Yosef. The Pasuk says, Yosef havaya li bein acher. That Rachel said, Hashem should give me another child. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, as an inyan from Yosef, the idea of Yosef, which is Hisafa, to add, is das was me macht as von an acher soll werden a ben. That you take someone which is an other, an outsider, and you bring him in, that he should become a son. He should become yours. He should become connected. And the same thing over here, this is the idea of the Hisafa, to take from the Psilas itself and add it into the world of holiness. Something that's completely disconnected from holiness and bring it in. On the Hisafa is B'shtayim. The addition here is in two different senses. Aleph, number one, in Welt. This is something which is being added in the world, in the possibilities of what's usually ordinary in the Avodah, in the nature of the world. This is a Haisafa v'chidish in the Bria. This is adding and bringing something totally new in the creation. Because if it's just the nature of things, the way it is in Seder Shtalshalus in the world, Zedainis, which are Avedas, cannot be transformed into Kedusha. There's no remnants of holiness that you could sense here at all. So that's one chiddush, to do something which is completely higher than the nature of things in the world. Beis, but there's another chiddush here. In Avram, there's a chiddush in Avram himself. When the pasuk says Vayosef Avram Goymer, it means that there was a new chiddush that took place within Avram himself. Weil der Inyan von Hishapcha von Gimel Klippes Atmeis, in order to transform and elevate even the three completely impure klippes, ken sich öfton nar b'koyach ha'atzmos. This is only by tapping into the power of the very essence of the Eibishter himself. It's only the essence of the Eibishter himself, is B'loshna Medrash, as the Medrash says, Eini yedeh be'ezem ben chofetz. That the Eibishter himself, which one does he desire? In B'maisem Eilu, B'maisem Shel Rishayim, does he desire the actions of the Rishayim or the actions of the Tzaddikim. When it comes to the Eibishter himself, there is nothing that has any significance at all. It's all just him, what he decides, what he chooses. So therefore, mitzad the Eibishter, the nature of goodness or the opposite that we see, is none of it is teifes makim. Und der Fahr, was diese Deinis, sind dort nicht teifes makim. And because the Deinis are not teifes makim at all, they have no significance, kommt von dort der Kayach zu können euch sehen, mahapach sein Lezachis. This is the source. The Eibishter, the essence of the Eibishter himself, is the source of being able to transform the Zedainis themselves into Zachias. As long as the Zedainis are something of significance which is opposite of Zachias in its own right, in its own nature, so therefore it's a contradiction. Zedainis cannot be elevated into Zachias. But if Zedainis are Zedainis and Zachias are Zachias, only because the Eibishter chooses so. Because it's Atzmas. He decides what Zedainis and what Zachias is. But the Zedainis and the Zachias in their own right don't have any contradictory nature. So then it's possible to elevate and transform the Zedainis into Zachias. Und das ist der Pirush in Vayosef Avram. So this is the deeper understanding of when it says Vayosef Avram, that there was an addition in Avram. As durch dem was bei Avram is nitaysev geworden a hechere koyach v'darge. It's when in Avram itself there was a new revelation, a new level that was revealed in him. Was nimmt sich von Atzmus, which stems from the essence of the Eibishter himself. Hat gekent oiftan den Birur in Hagav Yishmael. This is what gave him the power to accomplish the Birur, to elevate even from Gimel Klippus Atmeis, Hagar and Yishmael as well. Bay is the second question we asked before regarding Ketairis. Shenoim Masek Ketairis Dafke, that we say that her deeds were beautiful like Ketairis specifically. Why Ketairis? Weil der Inyan from the Yud Aleph Samemani Ketairis is, one of the ideas that it says about the 11 incenses is Ki Yidua was Yezenet Mehapech the Yud Aleph Kistrin the Mesavusat Sekdusha. So it's known that the number 11, not like the number 10 which is in holiness, but the number 11 refers to the 10 crowns of impurity. And here the point is Ketairis. Her deeds were beautiful like Ketairis, like the Ketairis in the Beis HaMikdash, which is taking this number 11 related to Klippah and elevating it into holiness. And Gimel, so this idea that she did Shuv is being said here specifically regarding her remarrying Avraham Avinu. The Tachlis for Yikach Isha is Pru Revu. The idea of getting remarried to her is having children. Was Haylada is an inyan from Eisafa v'Chiddush. Haylada, giving birth, is this concept of addition and a new child that comes into the world. As it happened over here, that he married her and she gave birth. Und damit is Muzbe was die Tshuva von Hagar, was in Yon is Eisafa Kanal, the Tshuva of Hagar, which is not just something which is natural in the process of elevating the sparks in the world, but this is something completely novel. Bringing from a place of Gimel Klippus Atmeis into Kedusha, wird nirmaz dafke da, wo der Meduber is wegen Vayosef Avram v'yikach isha geime. It's hinted specifically here where it talks about Avram Avinu marrying a wife. Was tachlisa is kahem shechaparsha v'atelad legeime. With the purpose of this, as the pasuk continues and says that she gave birth to children. So that's the connection to this subject of tshuva here. So this explains all the details in the name Keturah. Everything is exact and precise of why we're hinting it specifically Vayosef, Keturah, Ketairis, and in connection to the marriage. Now, as I mentioned, the Rebbe brings in here an interesting, seemingly strange Gemara. B'shaychet to them pasuk is da asipa tamua b'yosef l'chayrin Gemara. Connection to this pasuk, there's a very difficult Gemara to understand. It brings in this pasuk. B'nei Achsei Rab Tarfon, the sons of the sister of Rab Tarfon, his nephews. They were sitting in front of Rab Tarfon. As Rashi says, they didn't engage in conversation with him. They were sort of ignoring him. So Rab Tarfon opened up the conversation and said, as Rashi says, Kedeshi Yidabru. He wanted to get them to talk. Vayosef Avram vayikach isha ushma Yochani. Avram Avinu went and married another wife, and her name was Yochani. So Rashi says, Milsa ba'almahu de ka'ama kadelev teach pm. He was just saying something like this, something unusual, changing a word in a pasuk in order to get them to respond, that they should begin speaking with him. Amrile, so they actually responded and said, Keturah ksev. Not Yochani, it says in the pasuk Keturah. Kari aleim b'nei Keturah. So he referred to them as the children of Keturah. This is the Gemara. Very strange incident that the Gemara is sharing here. Is nit move on. So the question is, Aleph number 1, Favaz that zelt as the Gemara Bechlau. Why is the Gemara even sharing the story? The only thing it brings out is it's about the negative behavior of Rab Tarfon's nephews. Befrat, das ist doch a klal. Especially, there's a rule, as afilu begnus, beheme tmei le dibra kasev. The Torah stays away of even speaking in negative terms regarding a beheme that's tmei. Allah has come begnusum from bnei achse de Rab Tarfon. Definitely to speak about the negative behavior of the nephews of Rab Tarfon. Muss man sagen, as in them is faran a Torah ahira. There has to be a lesson that we're learning out from this, and that's why it's brought in the Gemara. Was is the ahira? What can we learn from this story? Beis, as eine Verein verschiedene Mitteln, wie zu Peil sein, auf den Zweiten, soll eben reden. There are many different methods how to get somebody to talk, to engage them in conversation. Nicht durch sagen, a pasuk Chelek zu rasai. Not having to use a pasuk and misconstrue the pasuk in order to get them to speak to you. Gimel, wie kommt man bechlal nutzen, if kayetze beze a pasuk von Torah? How are you using a pasuk in Torah for something mundane to try to engage your nephews in a conversation? Dalit, Favas hat Rab Tarfon gesagt, Ushma Yochani. When he switched the name in the pasuk, why did he specifically choose this name Yochani? L'chayre, seemingly, wollt mehr Massen gewinnt zum Mishane sein, durch sagen, Ushma Hagar. If he wants to switch it to say that her name was Hagar. Was Chach says Anders von Lashon HaKasev, it's different than the name that the pasuk actually says, is aber Emes and Teichen. But the content of it is true. This is Hagar. At least according to the majority of opinions. Even the other opinions that disagree, is the daitam elavela divrei al kim chayim. However, everybody agrees that all opinions have truth to it. Was the Far haben gemerkt Besil magten sein divrei Beishamai ledivreim, as we find regarding the arguments of Besil and Beishamai, the Gemara says elavela divrei al kim chayim. There's truth to both opinions, so much so that even Besil knows that there's truth in Beishamai's opinion, and therefore Beishamai's opinion is quoted first. Same thing over here. Everybody agrees that there's truth to the meaning of this pasuk that it refers to Hagar. So that would be something which is actually accurate. So even changing from the name Keturah to the name Hagar would be enough to get their attention and begin speaking to him. So how do we explain this strange incident in the Gemara here? So we can understand this by first prefacing what the Gemara tells us, Kol HaMelamed es ben chavere Torah. If you teach your friend's son Torah, Maila olav akosov ki ilu yoldai. The Torah considers it as if you gave birth to this person that you teach him Torah. Why is that? When you teach somebody Torah, vertmen ametzias chadasha. This individual becomes like a completely new entity. Und der Riber is es kilo yaldai. So it's like you give birth to him. Now, Hagam, as in Pashtus Aloshin, Kol HaMelamed es ben chavere, when it says anybody that teaches his friend Torah is mashma afilo oivder ben chavere hotchen ayidiyah in Torah. So simply this refers to teaching anybody Torah on any level, even someone that already has knowledge in Torah. Is this aber muvan, however it's understood, is this aber kamuvan, it's understood that beikir by azav was this bizitz nit given shayach zu limud Torah. This refers primarily to somebody that up until this point had no relation to learning Torah at all. So now the one that's teaching is accomplishing something completely new, opening him up to Torah which he had no relation to. Which is not the case if he already learned Torah before. So you're only adding to the information and who he was before with the Torah that he knew, so then it's not a hischatshus, it's not completely novel. Mit is verstandig, der Shini Aloshem Pirish Rashi. With this we could understand a certain change in the language of Rashi. Oif ve'ele toildes Aaron and Moshe. There's a Rashi in the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar when it speaks about the children of Aaron, and the pasuk says that these are the children of Aaron and Moshe, even though it doesn't mention Moshe Rabbeinu's children here. So Rashi says, "V'nikru toildes Moshe." We refer to them as the children of Moshe, Fishel lomdan Torah. Because Moshe Rabbeinu taught them Torah. And Melamed, from here we learn, Shekala Melamed Chulu, anybody teaching someone Torah, Maila Olav Akosov, Ki'ilu Yoldai. The Torah considers it as if you gave birth to this person. But here Rashi uses the expression Ki'ilu. In other words, when we learn out from here to anybody that teaches Torah, that it's as if you gave birth, but it's only Ki'ilu, as if. Then in the next Rashi, B'yom Diber Hashem es Moshe, And over here, Rashi is speaking specifically about Moshe Rabbeinu and his relation to Aaron's children. Here Rashi says, Nasu Elu Hataylis Shalai. They have become his children. So there's a difference here in the language of Rashi. By Bnei Aaron, when he speaks about the children of Aaron and saying that they are the children of Moshe, Zakta dem Loshen Nasu Elu Hataylis Shalai. They become his children. Nitnar Ki'ilu, without a as if. Masha'enken Kol Melamed, when it says about anybody that teaches someone Torah, is mer nitvas ma'il al v'kosav ki'ilu yoldai. Here, the expression that's used is that it's as if you gave birth to this person that you teach him. So what's the reason for this difference? Is there tam bezeh? The reason is v'baltas b'nei Aaron. When it comes to the children of Aaron that Moshe Rabbeinu taught them, is b'yoyim diber gaim, and the day that Hashem spoke by Har Sinai, haben ze ongeheben ze limudat Torah. This is the day that they began learning Torah for the first time. Mashalamad mipi akvura. Moshe Rabbeinu teaches them what he heard from Hashem. Fun Moshe, and they're learning it from Moshe. And anayfun fun ischachas. This is something completely brand new. Then as a demold Gevarin told this Moshe, and therefore they become the children of Moshe anakilu. And here Rashi does not even use the expression of as if. But when Rashi applies this and says that from here we could learn out similar to anybody that teaches his friend's child Torah, and this includes all kinds of circumstances, including somebody that already knows Torah before. Is Ashava Bekulam, what we can say equally about all circumstances by teaching Torah, Nitmer Viki'ilu Yoldai. That's as if you give birth to him because you're teaching him new information of Torah, but not literally that it becomes your children because he already has information of Torah from before. So we see over here, when you teach someone Torah, and it's in a complete new novel way that he had no relation to Torah, it's like he's born again. It's like literally like your child that is his chachas, absolute chiddush. Das is the bir in him separanal. So this also explains the story with Rab Tarfon and his nephews. Rab Tarfon had gesehen. What Rab Tarfon saw was as Bnei Achsei, his nephews, which are the sons of his sister, instead of Nitshayach to Divrei Havanas HaTorah. They had no connection to learning and understanding Torah. If Rab Tarfon wants to engage them in conversation, what does Rab Tarfon want to speak to them with? About the weather. And he wants to speak to them about Divrei Torah. And they weren't interested in talking to him. They had no relation to him in Divrei Torah. But since these are his nephews and they have a connection to him, and the Rebbe points to the Gemara where we're talking specifically about nephews that are the sons of his sister, and the Gemara says that the nephews, son of a sister, have a similar nature to the brother. So they're connected to him by in nature, not only they're related, but also connected to him in that way. So he wanted to accomplish, he wanted to influence them, to bring them in, to open them up to understanding Torah. That there should be a birth, a new birth in them, and really without the ki'ilu, but yoldai, a completely new chiddush to bring them into Torah. So therefore we could understand now why he brings the pasuk that we're speaking about here. So he brings an inyan dugmasa in Torah hayra. He brings something similar that we find in Torah, a lesson vayesef Avram vayikach isha gaimer, that Avram Avinu added and married another wife. Was tachlisa is tzalib videhemshach takev nachdem, as the pasuk immediately says. What was the marriage? Vatelid, that he had more children. So he's bringing a pasuk which speaks about a new birth. Getting married and giving birth. Azoi hat Rab Tarfon getan a pu'ule pasach va'omar. So over here Rab Tarfon was bringing the koyach of Torah, the lesson of Torah, and what he wanted to accomplish is to open up to oiftan in bnei achsei kedei sheyidabru in Torah, that they should speak in Torah, their ki'ilu yoldai, that this birth of Torah should take place in them. That's why Avram Avinu, Rab Tarfon that is, brings this pasuk about Avram Avinu and Keturah. But here, as we'll see in the continuation, there's something specific over here in connection to Keturah, in connection to this marriage, and why he switches it specifically to Yochani. And therefore he switched it to the name Yochani. The Gemara sagt in Seite. The Gemara in Seite tells us about this name Yochani as Almana Shevavis, a widow that lives amongst neighbors and she's always visiting her neighbors. Is from the Mivale Yailam. She's those that erode the world. And who is this? Kagan Yochani Basri TV. Like this Almana Yochani Basri TV. Now who was this Yochani Basri TV? Is Rashi Mefarish? So Rashi says as follows. Almana Mechashefa Haisa. She was a widow and she was involved in sorcery. When it came the time for a woman to give birth, so with her sorcery, she would stop her birth. And after this woman had a lot of pain, so then she would come and say, she would make believe as if she's coming to help her now, and she would say, should I come and beg for mercy for you, that you should be saved? Maybe Hashem will listen to my prayer. And then she would go and get rid of her kishuv, her sorcery, and the child would be born. So this was what she did in a negative sense. But what do we see from this Gemara? What she was trying to do is, she wanted people to think as the Elad is gekommen b'derech nes, that this is a supernatural birth, as a result of her davening. So now the Rabbi explains, this is why she got this nickname of Yochani. This name Yochani means the Name Yochani weist auf ein Inyan von Nes. It's a name connected to a miracle. Wie ist es verstandig von dem, was the Gemara sagt in Brachas? There's another Gemara in Brachas that tells us, Haraya, Hune b'chalem, Nes nasalei. If you see Hune in your dream, so a miracle will recur to you. Yochanan, if you see Yochanan in your dream, Nisei Nisim Nasalai. That means even greater miracles will occur to you. So the name Yochanan means miracles. Oich, besides the name Yochanan related to miracles, Hat the Lashon Yochani, Ashayches Miyachedes Sederiniyim Fun Eilades Banim. It's specifically connected to giving birth to children. Neisef Ala Masupa B'Saitisham. In addition to this name regarding this Almana Yochani, which is a supernatural birth that she tried to make believe as if that's happening. The pasuk says, Hayeladim Ashachanan Alekim Esavdecha. When Yaakov says, these are the children that Hashem has given me, or Hashem has graced me with, and the term Chanan is used, and Chanan is related to the name Yochani. So now what do we understand from this? The name Yochani in itself refers to a birth, and actually a supernatural birth. Und der Vater hat Rab Tarfon gesagt, du Shema Yochani, that Avram Avinu married a wife, and her name is Yochani, weil da gedarft auftan an Inyan von Kilo Yoldai, because here he was trying to accomplish a new birth, durch und in Limudat Torah, through and in learning Torah with his nephews, was is nit al piteva v'seider aragel, in a supernatural way, and not in the usual way, because they weren't interested in learning Divrei Torah. So he had to open them up and use a tremendous supernatural birth to bring them into Torah. That's what he was hinting, or that's what he was empowering them by bringing this pasuk and using the term Yochani. Das ist echt das Baden Hemshech HaSipur. So this explains the continuation of the story. As nachdem wie Bnei Achse haben ihm gesagt, Ketura ksiv. They corrected him and they said that the pasuk says Ketura. Hat sie Rab Tarfon angerufen Bnei Ketura. He referred to them as Bnei Ketura. He did not want the concept of Ketura, and he says, no. If you're going to say Ketura, so then you're Bnei Ketura. What does that mean? Oib Ketura ksiv. If we're going to read the pasuk as Ketura, Lashon Kshira. Ketura means to tie closed. Eitzeres Rachma. The womb is closed. Heipich von Yochani, which is opposite of what the name Yochani means. Was tut oif haylade kanal. Yochani means a birth, and even a supernatural birth. So the new birth in their learning of Torah, to engage with him in learning, will not be accomplished. The psichas hamayach and avanas haTorah, to open up their minds to learning Torah. Nor ze willen blijven bnei ketura kshira, they'll remain children of ketura, which means tied closed, mit hamayach atam, with a closed mind, nit shayach to avanas haTorah, not having the ability to understand words of Torah. So he was even pushing them further. No, don't remain closed. Don't remain B'nai Keturah. This was another way of pushing them to open up to the supernatural birth of Yochani. Leighton Bieranal, according to this explanation that we said before. So the Rebbe now is connecting this back to a detail that was said before in Sifei and Vav regarding Vayesef Avram Goyim Al Piyene Shal Torah Berashi. What does Vayesef Avram, according to the deeper understanding in Rashi, mean? As we bald, Avram had gedarft oiftana hisafe v'chidish haylade. Since Avram Avinu, when he went and remarried Hagar, was accomplishing something completely novel. Durch mahapach sein von Gimel klippes atmeis liktusha. He's elevating from the lowest klippes into holiness. Hat gemust früher sein der Vayesef Avram. So it must first be a Vayesef Avram, which means a hisafe, something novel within Avram himself. That a new level in Avram that he draws from Atzmus, from the essence of the Eibishter. That's the meaning of Vayosef Avram. We could also explain, on a deeper level, was Rab Tarfon had gebracht, why, when Rab Tarfon was speaking to his nephews, he also quotes the beginning of the pasuk, Vayosef Avram. The L'chayre, because seemingly, that a wife was taken and her name was Yechani. Und sie wollten gewusst, welcher Pasuk meint, they would know which Pasuk he's referring to. Well, das ist der einzige Pasuk, wo steht, the Lashon Vayikach Isha Shma Gayim. This is the only Pasuk in Torah that it says it in this way, even if it does not say the beginning of the Pasuk Vayosef Avram. So why did he also quote the words of Vayosef Avram when he's speaking to his nephews? And this is a question even based on what the Rebbe said before. The Rebbe said the whole point of him bringing this pasuk is to speak about this birth and the birth of Yechani and not Keturah. He was telling them, don't be children of Keturah which are tied closed-minded. Open up your minds to Torah. But for that point, he didn't have to bring the beginning of the pasuk Vayosef Avram. However, according to what we said before, this is understood. In order that Rab Tarfon should have the power to teach them Torah. Was by Bnei Achse is an inyan from Hilodavis Chachas. By his nephews, this was like a new birth, like something completely novel, a completely new breakthrough. He has to work with himself, to connect himself, to draw within himself a deeper connection to the essence of Torah. By Bnei Achse. And then, by him connecting to Atzmus, to the essence of the Eibishter, is he then able to reach even his nephews, which are completely outside and not associated with Torah. Und auf dem hat gebracht eine Reihe von an Inyan Dugmasi in a Pasuk in Torah. So therefore he brings the Pasuk and something similar that it says in Torah itself. Vayosef Avram. First there was an addition in Avram himself. Und danach, und durch dem that is, Vayikach Isha Geimer. And then he marries Keturah. The Heisafa in Madreges Avram, this new level in Avram himself, hat gebracht, as es soll kennen sein, Vayikach Isha Geimer. This gives him the ability that now he can take a new wife. The purpose is, as the pasuk says, that they gave birth an inyan von Hilada v'hischachus kanal, a new birth and a supernatural birth, as we explained before. V'oid lefarish, in them was kari aleim b'nei keturah. Another way to explain why, in the conclusion of this incident, so Rab Tarfon tells his nephews that they are b'nei keturah. So here the Rebbe will explain this, that this is actually something positive. Before, the Rebbe said B'nei Keturah he was telling them, don't be closed-minded, don't be B'nei Keturah. Here the Rebbe says we could explain as follows. The Rambam paskint as B'nei Keturah, the descendants of Keturah, Shem Zarish al Avram, which are descendants of Avram, Chayavim b'milah, have the mitzvah and are obligated in the mitzvah of bris milah. Thus, hey, so what do we see here? As Durach Vayosef Avram v'yikach Isha Shma Keturah, when Avram Avinu went and married Keturah, was his aninyan von his chachos, which is something completely novel. Shaloi al pisei the shtalshalos, elevating even Hagar, not according to the normal process of elevating holy sparks in the world. Kanal Sivav, as was explained before. Hatarayv Gitan, what he accomplished is, this went so far, as a soll sein b'nei Keturah, und sie seine mechoyev in Mila, that these b'nei Keturah, he gave birth to these children, and that they and their descendants are obligated in the bris. Now, what is the significance of being connected and obligated in the mitzvah of bris Mila? Was Mila is Rashi Tevis from Miyala Lono Hashemayim. As Alter Rebbe says in Torah, Mila makes up the words of Mi Yala Lono Hashemayim. Who could ascend up to heaven? Shesayfi Tevis Uavaya. And the Sayfi Tevis is Yudke Vavke. Of these four words, Mi Yala Lono Hashemayim, the end of these words is Yudke Vavke. So you understand that the beginning of the words, of the Mi Yala Lono Hashemayim, is even greater from Avaya. It says Hecha from Pchinas HaTeira and Shem Avaya. So Mila is greater than Torah and even higher than the name Avaya. That says Hechef from Seder Shtalshalos. The mitzvah of Bris Mila is a connection above Seder Shtalshalos. Und das kommt durch Gemalte Mesarles Levavchem. This is revealed and accomplished through the mitzvah of Bris Beruchnius, which is tshuva, to circumcise the heart. Inyan tshuva. Und das meint Kari Aleim B'nei Keturah. This is what Rab Tarfon was saying to his nephews when he responded to them and referred to them as children of Keturah. Rab Tarfon hat koire mamshach gewen. Rab Tarfon referred to them and brought down into them, in them inyan von Hilada, a new birth in Limudat Torah, in their ability to learn Torah. Not according to the regular order of things, they were completely disconnected of Torah, but he brought on a deeper power of Torah, al derech di pe'ule von Avram in Bnei Keturah. Similar to this accomplishment of what Avram Avinu accomplished when he remarried Keturah, and they now became a chuyiv in the midst of bris milah, he elevated them to this level of miyad alanu hashamayma. And this is the same thing that Rab Tarfon brought into his nephews that couldn't learn Torah.